All right, what you got for me?
Well, you can see here that we found trace amounts of salt kind of all around the murder site. It's pretty clear to me what happened here.
We're using the 3D salt modeler or the handheld 3D salt model junior?
We're using a special new device called a bag filtration 5000 machine. It really captures all the salt in there for us.
I see. And did you take harmonic dental record filings of them?
We did, but the infrared scanner came back with both negative and positive, and there's only one thing that can mean.
Time to enhance.
That's right. See right here, right around the head.
Enhance more?
Okay, yep.
Oh, enhance,
Is that better?
Enhance more, a little more there.
Okay, that's about as far as I can go.
I think I know what this is.
That's right.
This person has been brutally murdered by a Daily Solutions podcast.
What sort of sick animal would do that to another human being? Okay, hey everybody.
Hey there.
This is Ashkan.
Graham here. And
What's
today's
our question?
I was like, I thought you were going to read it even though you never do for some
What's
reason.
our question?
Today's question is... Oh, look, it's a good one today. Yeah.
Oh.
It's not a... It's actually, it's a very, very big question.
Okay.
We get it from a lot of people.
Uh-huh.
And we know how to answer it.
Oh, that's lucky.
What's a fair amount to budget for each float room's construction? Assuming middle-of-the-road fanciness but industry-refined techniques like green glue and double sheetrock, offset studs, waterproof flooring, FRP, a standard size, etc. Thanks.
A very polite question.
Yeah, it also assumes that we're actually going to give a good answer. So
yeah, I'm gonna hold your thanks for a minute here.
Right.
So let's extend the question a little bit.
Sure.
To talk about like a whole float center, because you can't.
I thought you were going to talk about our lives and what we did today. Kind of just make it a little more about us than about floating would be nice.
Because you need a lobby, you need someone to draw up architectural plans. There's a lot more that goes into starting up a float center than specifically just the construction of the float room.
And you need a float tank.
And you need a float tank to put in the room. So I think it's a little bit better to consider this in terms of your general startup cost, which is also very much dependent on how many float rooms you're building.
Yeah, and so this is an interesting one in itself, too. This idea of a cost per float room is a little bit deceptive because each room that you're adding onto your center gets successively less expensive to build out, both because you get bulk rates on the float tanks. As long as a contractor is already out on site, you're kind of paying a fee just to have them out there. So when you're building extra rooms, then it means that labor gets cheaper because they've already signed on for a contract. So your second room is going to be more affordable than your first. Your third room is going to be more affordable than your first or second rooms, or all three are going to get cheaper depending on how you think about it. So there are some economies of scale that kind of go into this too.
Yeah, and your lobby space also scales, I think, a little bit easier the bigger things get. Like the amount of extra space you need in your lobby for 2 float rooms instead of 1 is not as significant as having a lobby in the first place. Right.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So in general, though, for our kind of rule of thumb, building out a new float tank center, we like to estimate between $50,000 to $100,000 per float tank that you're having in the center, assuming that you're not offering any other services. And that also includes having money in the bank after you open, so having some runway with your cash. And it assumes things going wrong, too, so having enough money set aside so that during construction you can actually pay for mistakes that are being made. And that's a pretty big range, like going from 50 to 100,000 is, of course, doubling the budget of your float tank center. But that's not even as high as you can go. Like, you could easily spend a huge amount of money just decorating your lobby and turn that into $200,000 per tank that you have in your center. Or
right. So those numbers kind of follow the assumptions that this question has. It's assuming we're not doing some crazy, insane, marble-walled lobby space with beautiful interior design.
Which no one should ever do in a float tank center yet.
But it is also assuming that you're building the float rooms themselves with some pretty substantial and serious construction, the double-layered sheetrock and, good soundproofing, good waterproofing, all that sort of stuff. And still, like, the range can be just that big in terms of what float tank you buy.
Yeah.
There are float tanks that are $50,000 more expensive than other float tanks. So like that alone could cover that entire gap depending on which direction you're going there.
Yeah, and if you're getting up to the point where you're paying in the, $60,000 range for float tanks, you're not even going to be able to get the kind of $100,000 per room down in your final cost of the building, So consider this, a lower to mid range for float tank centers, even though it sounds really high, saying that it's going to be $300,000 to $600,000 for a 6-tank center. It is a very large number, but again, that's like enough money to make sure that it's actually done well, and depends a lot on your area as well, type of float tank, things like that. So there are a lot of variables, but that's the range where you're probably not cutting enough corners that you're making your life miserable 2 years from now.
Yeah, like if you were spending less than that, I would take a critical look at exactly what construction you're choosing and things like that. And if you're spending more than that, hopefully you know where it's going. You're buying pretty expensive float tanks, or you are deciding to spend a lot of money on marketing right off the bat, or you're deciding to do some, hire a really nice interior designer or something like that. I will also say when we talk to float centers after they've opened, it pretty much are in that range. Like when I talk to people, like these is very much backed by not only us like crunching numbers and kind of working through construction costs, but it's also backed by a lot of real world feedback we get from people when we see people open their float centers and they look nice and they did a good job, and we ask them how much it took to open it that way. It's almost always in that range, $50,000 to $100,000 per float tank.
Yeah, and so we've been saying this for a long time, and I think it was this last year's industry report, maybe it was the year before, but when we were taking an average of all of the costs that it took centers to open per tank that they had, it came out to so close to this. It was like within $1,000. It was like $49,000 to $99,000 was the actual average that it cost all of the existing centers per tank to open up. So check out the industry report as well. It gives you a good range, but it seems like, although we were kind of just winging this and saying it offhand a few years ago, it's turned out to actually be true. So hopefully
like
that's the case
most of our
for
advice.
Yeah,
true after the fact.
Yeah, fortunately we're very lucky. So hopefully that compensates for the complete idiocy that normally issues forth from us. Any other details that we want to go into here, or that's just kind of a good?
I think that's the good rough idea of everything. I mean, there's a million details and all the construction, all that stuff.
And they can all change. I will also say I've heard of more centers opening that break that range on the high side recently, like in the last couple of years than before.
Usually in pretty big cities.
Yeah.
Where the cost of everything is kind of a little bit more intense.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially more towards downtowns of those cities, more towards like big actual shopping districts, anything like that is obviously going to not only be more for rent, but more for construction, because you have to deal with all of your neighbors and not interfering too much with like public walkways, which you now have to pay money for and things like that. So great. Thank you. Thanks for the question. It's, again, big, broad overview type questions. So nice having it out there. And if you have any others, go to floattanksolutions.com/podcast.
We'll talk to you guys later.